afternoon, secular fam. It is crazy how whole entire years are now being packed into a week, but that is how the march to fascism works. Today, our guest has limited time, so we're going to get right to it. But please stay after he leaves because I have some pretty serious updates happening all over the state of Arizona and some very real and dangerous threats to free speech in the Constitution. But because we want to make sure that Andrew gets all the time, we're going to hold that off to the end. So today we are speaking with none other than Andrew Seidel. Andrew is a constitutional and civil rights attorney and the author of 2 books, The Founding Myth, Why Christian Nationalism is Un-American, and American Crusade, How the Supreme Court is Weaponizing Religious Freedom, which he'll be discussing today. He's also the co-editor of an academic text, Law and Religion, Cases and Materials, 5th edition, with Professor Leslie Griffin of UNLV Law School. Andrew has been fighting to keep church and state separate for more than a decade. Currently, Andrew is the VP of Strategic Communications at Americans United for Separation of Church and State, the largest organization fighting for that founding principle. So there's a whole bunch more I could say about Andrew, but he's got a lot to say today. So I am just going to go ahead and hand it over to him. Feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I'll monitor the chat, Andrew, okay?
Great. And yeah, as always, the best words in the English language for a lawyer are captive audience. So, I'm excited about this. I've got a lot to say. Thank you for the warm introduction and for the invitation. I also want to do just two quick apologies up front. And the first is I have been thinking a lot about the after times, about what comes next, what's on the other side of this, because the sun shines brightest in the morning, however dark the night was. And because in the end, the shadow is only a passing small thing, to borrow from Tolkien twice. And what I'm writing about, I am writing about what's next for the law and for the rule of law and for our fight for a secular government. I'm actually spending the fall visiting some law schools. I'm going to give some talks to students and to professors. But I'm not quite there yet. I'm still doing some thinking and still working through some of the ideas and the writing. And so I am very much coming to you with a work in progress right now. It's definitely, it'd be too much to say that it's an unfinished symphony, but it's unfinished and that it's undone. And this is really going to be for lawyers and law professors and judges to help us figure out the road forward when this fever breaks. So the first apology is y'all are guinea pigs, and for that I am so sorry. And the second is that I set aside 8 hours this morning to do some of that work and get a little bit more of a PowerPoint together, and we lost daycare and we have a sick kid and my partner's in court all day, so there are kids here who are probably going to come walking in at some point, and I will be doing this to listen to them. And I have to go. The reason I have to go sooner than we hoped is because I have to go get the other one from school because we don't have daycare. So for all of that, I apologize. Now let's dive in, because we're in it. We're in it. Religious freedom, it should protect everybody who's watching this. It should guarantee my right and your right to be a blasphemous, godless heathen, your right to join a temple or a mosque or a church, to worship one God or no God or every God in every holy book, whatever you choose. Religious freedom is your shield. It's that hallowed protection against government overreach. It's the minority's protection from the tyranny of the majority, and it's a right that is only guaranteed by a strong separation of church and state. And that's how we've understood things for most of American history, even when we've failed to implement it, or even if our fellow Americans have at times trampled it. But right now we are in the midst of an upheaval. The Supreme Court, which was successfully targeted for capture, has been on a crusade. The conservative justices have been weaponizing religious freedom. And this is the story that I tell in American Crusade. And when I say they are weaponizing religious freedom, that's not a frightful turn of phrase. I mean precisely that. I mean that in case after case, they are litigating the legal meaning of religious freedom as a constitutional right. And in the process, they are redefining it. They're perverting the meaning of that right. They're turning religious freedom into a weapon that can be used to infringe and violate the rights of other people. So if you look at the cases that are before the Supreme Court, and we're going to walk through some of them kind of quickly, the religious freedom challenges are superficially about Christian crosses and veterans, or about playgrounds and skinned knees, or about private school vouchers, or bakeries and website designers and gay weddings, or those coaches that they just want to pray. But really they are about power and privilege and above all supremacy. The justices are rewriting religious freedom, and they're turning that shield into a sword. And if it is wielded by a Christian, it can be used to harm other people and violate their rights. Again, that's the story I tell in American Crusade. I'm not going to tell it again here, but you do need the broad strokes. You need to understand where we are and how we got there, so we can think about what happens next, right? So we can rethink religious freedom, so we can kind of reverse that process. If they've reforged that shield into a sword, so we need to figure out how to beat that sword maybe back into a plowshare, if we really want to get all crazy with our metaphors here. And so let's take a quick look at how we got here. For my money, the Crusade kicked off in earnest with the Supreme Court's Deus Vult in a case called Salazar v. Buono. And the Supreme Court really signaled its desire, or its willingness at least, to entertain this weaponization in this 2010 opinion that involved the cross in the Mojave Desert. And the court approved a farcical fix for a constitutional violation, a land swap that itself violated the separation of church and state. So there's this 8-foot tall Christian cross in the middle of more than 1.5 million acres of public land, the Mojave National Preserve. And a retired National Park Service employee challenges that cross in court. And right, the cross is the preeminent symbol of Christianity. It's in the middle of 1.5 million acres of government land. It's like a conquistador's flag, right? It's marking their territory. The land is supposed to belong to we the people, but it belongs to we the Christians. That's unconstitutional by any measure. And complying with the Constitution by removing that cross was seen as a threat to Christians, right? It was symbolic of their loss of their dominant status. And so these Christian nationalist groups intervene to keep the cross up. And so does Congress, actually. So this case is crazy, and I'm very much simplifying it. But to ensure that the cross stayed up, Congress transferred out of that sea of 1.5 million acres, 1 acre of land under the cross to a private entity that would, quote, maintain the cross or lose the land. So in other words, you get this 1 acre of land, and if you take the cross down, the land comes back to us. So Congress gave away some land to keep a Christian cross up. So that's not a solution, right? That is itself a way to perpetuate the violation. It's a sham of a remedy, and that sham of a remedy was challenged because, like the cross, the land transfer itself had a religious purpose. So it's also a constitutional violation. And in a 5-4 decision, the conservative justices on the court, Roberts, Thomas, Alito, Scalia, and Kennedy at that time, they approved that sham. And again, this was a complicated case. It bounced up and down the courts quite a bit. And anytime Congress is wading into litigation and passing laws, it's going to be a mess. And the 5 conservatives actually had a hard time agreeing on the why of all of this. But the end result of the litigation was well noted by Christian nationalist legal outfits, groups like ACLJ, Jay Sekulo's outfit, First Liberty Institute, and the cross stayed up because the court accepted this flimsiest of legal fictions over a constitutional principle, right? And more ominously, the Supreme Court agreed to accept that fiction because it could be employed against constitutional principles if the result privileged Christians, right? So the message there was pretty unmistakable. Christianity first, the Constitution second, if at all. And I happen to see that question, so I'll just go ahead and answer it. ACLJ is the American Center for Law and Justice. That is Jay Sekulo's outfit, one of the older Christian nationalist legal outfits there. Took some of the earliest Supreme Court cases in this kind of litany that even before some of the ones I'm going to mention. And some of the other groups that are waging this war on religious freedom, you have Alliance Defending Freedom, Becket Fund for Religious Liberty, Liberty Council, already mentioned First Liberty Institute, right? This Orwellian word salad that I like to talk about. They heard the message in that case and the floodgates just open, right? And so they file lawsuit after lawsuit after lawsuit, and they set the cases up, and the conservative justices come and knock them down. And all of that accelerates once Trump takes over. So here's what the last decade and a half kind of looked like for this area of the law. In 2011, the court allowed a school voucher program to send taxpayer funds to religious schools by denying citizens' ability to challenge that program. In 2012, it said that religious organizations can legally discriminate when they're hiring clergy. And then it said, oh, and you can also do the same thing when you're hiring other employees, even if they don't have religious duties, even if you're hiring secular employees for secular duties. In 2014, it said that religious freedom can override the rights of other citizens, and it upheld the Christian-only prayers in the town of Greece, New York. So we're talking about, that's the Hobby Lobby case, is the first one there. In 2017, the court forced taxpayers to fund a Lutheran children's ministry. That's the Trinity Lutheran case. In 2018, it rediscovered really a potent argument: hostility toward religion. And it used that argument to let a business owner violate state civil rights laws and to discriminate against protected classes of people. That's the Masterpiece Cake Shop case. That same year, and I mean, this was just, these cases were just weeks apart. After bemoaning that hostility toward Christians in the Masterpiece Cake Shop case, it upheld Donald Trump's Muslim ban, in which there was explicit hostility towards Muslims. In 2019, it abandoned the need for any kind of sham remedy and simply said, yeah, go ahead, put your Christian cross up on government property. In 2020, it continued to abandon pretense and said that taxpayers must fund religious schools. That's the Espinoza case out of Montana. And then it began striking down public health measures in the name of religious freedom. And that was right after Amy Coney Barrett got on the court. You'll remember that we started seeing decisions that struck down public health measures in the middle of a pandemic, claiming religious freedom. In 2021, in the Fulton v. Philadelphia case, the court basically allowed the Catholic Church to discriminate against a minority in the name of God while performing government functions with taxpayer funds. 2022 was a banner year. The court forced Boston to fly the Christian flag over City Hall, which, if you were paying attention during the January 6th insurrection, yes, that was the same flag they carried onto the floor of the Senate. It abolished reproductive freedom. It forced taxpayers to fund religious indoctrination at bigoted Christian schools, and it allowed a coach at a public school to impose his personal religion on other people's kids. And that was the 4 big cases. In 2023, it allowed a for-profit business to violate the civil rights of LGBTQ people in the 303 Creative case. And then this past term was a pretty big term too. There were 3 cases before it. There's the Catholic Charities case. And effectively there, the court said, yeah, you may be a secular charity doing secular work, but if you come under the umbrella of an organization that is religious, you get to be religious too. And you can be exempt from any of the contributions to the social safety net that we expect of businesses and other organizations. In the Mahmood case out of Montgomery County, it essentially allowed religious parents to have a heckler's veto over public school curriculum. I am overstating that holding right now because that is where I think that holding is going to go based on all of the filings I have seen citing that case. And then we did get, I'm going to end this litany on a win of sorts. The court wanted to allow the first religious public school in the history of this country. But Amy Coney Barrett recused herself, and John Roberts, for whatever reason, couldn't bring himself to do it. And I'm sure we're going to revisit Roberts's reason in the coming years for doing so. So that let the Oklahoma Supreme Court's decision striking down that school stand because the court deadlocked 4-4. But there were still 5 justices, one of them had to sit it out on the bench, 5 that we know of who would have upheld a religious public school. So that is a lot. It's a lot to handle. Some of those descriptions may trip you up. You may not recognize those cases because I'm not repeating them the way they were described by our opponents or by the media, which doesn't always do a great job in these cases. And some of those cases may not seem familiar to you because The other side is really, really, really good with public communications, much better than our side is. They really work hard to manipulate reality and public perception. The Masterpiece Cake Shop case is, I think, the quintessential example of that, because that was a case about a business discriminating against a gay couple, and all of a sudden it became a case about this poor persecuted Christian artist, and it was a remarkable bait and switch. And nope, we're good. Okay. I also, the other thing is that this, some of those descriptions may not land for you because I am not entirely sure we live in a shared reality anymore. And that makes it very hard to have the rule of law. And the Supreme Court is by no means immune from this. In fact, they're terrible at it. And I'm going to give you one example. The case I mentioned of the coach that was imposing his prayer on other people's kids. This is the Kennedy versus Bremerton case from 2022. In that case, the Ninth Circuit Court warned that First Liberty Institute, which was the Christian nationalist group on the other side of that case, First Liberty Institute was spinning a, quote, false, that was the word the court used, and, quote, deceitful narrative in the case. False, deceitful narrative. The three-judge panel explained that this is a quote, the facts in the record utterly belie his contention that the prayer was personal and private. Okay. In a concurring opinion denying a review by the entire Ninth Circuit, which is called an en banc review, one of the judges actually kind of hammered his fellow judges for buying into these lies. So Judge Smith wrote this, quote, unlike Odysseus, who was able to resist the seductive song of the sirens by being tied to a mast and having his shipmates stop their ears with beeswax, our colleague, Judge O'Scanlan, appears to have succumbed to the siren song of a deceitful narrative of this case spun by counsel for the appellant, to the effect that Joseph Kennedy, a Bremerton High School football coach, was disciplined for holding silent private prayers. That narrative is false. He added, the reader should know that the following basic truth. Kennedy was never disciplined by the high school for offering private silent prayers. And then this is, and I've never seen anything like this in an opinion. The judge goes on to declare to compare the deceitful narrative, which he calls them the unmoored claims of the deceitful narrative, side by side in a chart with reality, right? So here's their unmoored claim, and here's what actually happened in a chart. I mean, I've never seen anything like that. Another judge said that the actual record bears little resemblance to the hypothetical scenarios posited by Coach Kennedy. Now, I don't know if there are any lawyers out there, or if you have the equivalent of an ethics regulatory body in your profession, but if a federal judge said this about me and my litigation and my claims in court, like, I would go hide my head in shame. I would take a sabbatical. I would question what I was doing with my life. Maybe I would read up on some moral philosophy. I would certainly take some ethics CLEs. Instead, First Liberty Institute took this case and that deceitful false narrative right to the Supreme Court. And they didn't change a damn thing. After being called out by federal judges, they repeated the false and deceitful narrative to the justices. And just think about that. Just think about how confident they must have been that this deceitful narrative would fall on friendly ears. They knew that it wasn't going to bite them in the ass. And they were right, which is maybe the worst part of it. And it's actually even worse than that, because a full year and a half before the Institute even asked the Supreme Court to take that case, the coach and his wife sold their house in Washington State, where all this took place, and moved literally to the farthest other state in the country, in the lower 48 states, to Florida, as far away as you can get. They moved to Florida. They called themselves Floridians on their social media. They voted in local elections, right? That should have ended the case. because the only relief that this coach sought from the court, from the Supreme Court as a coach, was reinstatement to his job. And nobody is going to commute 2,800 miles for a $4,498 seasonal job. And now the Institute had a duty to inform the court about Kennedy's move and that the case was now moot. But, you don't kill a goose that's laying golden eggs, whatever the ethics rules say, right? Who cares about ethics rules? And the move was only discovered after the Supreme Court agreed to hear the case. The school district informed the justices and explained that the case was moot, and the justices just ignored it. And the reason the justices ignored it is because these justices want to take these cases. They didn't have to decide this case. They shouldn't have decided this case. They wanted to decide this case in this way. And if there are any of you out there who are wondering, no, of course he didn't resume his position after he won. He flew up from Florida for one practice and then quit. And he still lives in Florida today. So, how is it possible? How can we say that the courts wants to take these cases? How can they ignore reality and even photographic evidence that disproves their lies? Because the court's captured. The court is captured. The conservative legal movement played a long game. They worked to pack the courts. Leonard Leo and the conservative legal movement set out to capture and pack the courts because they could not win otherwise. They couldn't win. Couldn't win outside of court. Can't win in politics. They couldn't win in the court. And it's really evidenced by a former employee who described Leonard Leo's mission. He described his mission like this. Leo figured out 20 years ago that conservatives had lost the culture war. Abortion, gay rights, contraception, conservatives didn't have a chance if public opinion prevailed, so they needed to stack the courts. And that's what they did. And just pay attention. That is an anti-democratic confession. That is an anti-democratic goal. If they don't stack the court, the majority is going to rule. If they don't stack the court, the democracy is going to work. So Leo orchestrated that capture, and that helps us answer why the court buys into those deceitful narratives that aren't reflected by reality and are in fact disproven by photographs that I would have showed you if I could have gotten my PowerPoint together without things. So, Leo was described as the monitor of the nominee's ideological purity. A monitor of the nominee's ideological purity. We're talking about judicial nominees there, right? This was his job, was to get ideologically pure nominees onto the Supreme Court. Leo wrote the short list of potential Supreme Court nominees that Trump publicized during Trump 1.0. And all told, we know that Leo is responsible or helped with the confirmation of Roberts, Alito, Gorsuch, Kavanaugh, and Barrett. Thomas is an old friend of his. All six are or were members of the Federalist Society. And that's 6 votes. And we know that Leo personally chose 5 of them for their ideological purity. And they weren't selected. I'm going to beat this into you. They were not selected because they are fair-minded jurists deciding cases impartially on the facts and the law, because they're umpires. That's what we're supposed to have. But if that were the goal, there would be no need to block every Merrick Garland and rush Amy Coney Barrett onto the court, right? They didn't want fair and impartial jurisdiction. They wanted ideological purity and dedication to the conservative, the Republican, the Christian nationalist cause. And let me just put it another way. Overall, we know of about $580 million that Leonard Leo's various groups spent capturing and packing the court from 2014, when they helped block Merrick Garland's nomination, to 2020. You do not spend $500 million to get an impartial court. You just don't. They bought a court. They captured one branch of the federal government for about $500 million. So that's the setup. Took a little longer than I hoped. I got a little fired up, as tends to happen. But the question that I am thinking about is, what happens when this fever breaks? And here I mean all of it, outside of the Supreme Court, right? Maybe it won't. Maybe we're stuck here. I don't think so. I think the fever is going to break, and this too shall pass. So what happens? Are we going to look back on the John Roberts court as another Lochner era? And if you want to have like a really nerdy, fun history, like go down the Lochner era Wikipedia page. Basically, we kind of all just are like, yeah, the court kind of got everything wrong at that point in time. We're just going to kind of ignore everything they did. What do we do when this is over? What do we do when we get back to some sort of reasonable understanding of religious freedom and church-state separation, one that doesn't allow folks to impose their beliefs on others? What's that going to look like? And this is what I've been thinking about. In this thought experiment, it requires making certain assumptions, including that our Constitution is not going to be amended, which is maybe not impossible. And there's certainly something to be said for considering amendments, but given our fractured media environment and our silo and divided country, the idea of arriving at any kind of useful consensus there seems a little bit ludicrous. So I think we can safely say we're stuck with what we have for a while. So let's just take a little bit of a closer look at what we have. And I want us to rethink our approach to religious freedom and church-state separation a little bit. And you will hear a lot of people in our movement, including a lot of lawyers, including a lot of leaders, talk about the Establishment Clause. And I know you probably all even recognize that phrase, even if maybe you can't quote it verbatim or don't know exactly what it is. That's because we've put all of our eggs in that one basket, in the Establishment Clause basket. And when I say the Establishment Clause, I am talking about one particular phrase of the First Amendment. So, First Amendment says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Continues on after that. That phrase, we call those the religion clauses. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. That's the Establishment Clause. Or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That's the Free Exercise Clause. Okay? Religion clauses, Establishment Clause, Free Exercise Clause. Over the years, using a combination of standing doctrine, which is what keeps people in or out of court, and a willingness to avoid making decisions that might upset the Christian majority, the sole functional clause that we have been using to uphold the separation of church and state has been whittled down to the Establishment Clause. And the cases that I was reading out to you, really since we're talking like really closer to 2016, 2017, have been using the Free Exercise Clause to swallow up the Establishment Clause. So there's a quote that I want to read you from Justice Sonia Sotomayor dissenting in her Carson versus Macon case, which was a 2022 case about forcing taxpayers to fund Christian schools that happen to be bigoted. And she's quoting a 2017 case of hers. She says this, quote, "What a difference 5 years makes. In 2017, I feared that the court was leading us to a place where separation of church and state is a constitutional slogan, not a constitutional commitment. Today, the court leads us to a place where the separation of church and state becomes a constitutional violation." That was 3.5 years ago. And what the conservative majority has done has turned that free exercise clause into a black hole. So it's swallowing, to borrow Sonia Sotomayor's dissent again, everything around it. So what we have right now, where we are at the point where the conservative justices, who profess themselves to be originalists and textualists, they have arrived at this absurd singularity where one clause of a sentence of the Constitution is now read as a violation of the subsequent clause of the same sentence of the Constitution. The justices have told us that the phrase "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion" violates or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. That is where we are. It is absurd. It is impossible to overstate how absurd this is. And stated blindly and looked at from any kind of detached view, it cannot be right. There is no way that the founders wrote a single sentence where the first part violates the second. And this is the reason that people hate lawyers. Okay? It's things like this. This is why I get it, lawyer, I get it. This is why people hate lawyers. it's also, this is not where the separation of church and state lies. The separation of church and state is woven into the very fabric of our Constitution. It's everywhere. It's omnipresent. It's what they want their God to be, okay? The wall of separation between church and state is an American original. This is an American invention. The idea was floating around in the Enlightenment, but never was it realized until we implemented it in the American experiment. So it was written down in our Constitution. Never before in the history of the world had a people sought to protect their ability to think freely by separating religion and government. And if you look at that Constitution, the truly unique and original elements are secular, and they uphold that legacy. And that's a legacy I think we can be proud of. So let me show you some of the places where it is woven. Okay? Our Constitution was the first to declare that power comes from the people, not God's. So those words at the beginning, we the people, they are poetic, they are symbolic, but they are so much more. They are a declaration of power. Self-government is one of the overriding American principles, and self-government is impossible if power flows from the divine. But self-government is natural when power flows from the people. Our Constitution was also the first governing document not to mention a god or a deity. And it is godless by choice, not by accident. And we know this because there were people in that founding generation who objected to that choice. And there have been movements throughout American history to rewrite our preamble to add Jesus into it and to minimize we the people. None have succeeded. Right? So that's the beginning of the document and the entire document. We the people, no mention of a God. Our Constitution was also the first to ban religious tests for public office. That's in Article 6. And this was the only mention of religion in the original document before we got to the amendments. And the ban on religious tests is some of the most clear and emphatic language in the entire document. No religious test shall ever be required as a qualification to any office or public trust. No shall ever any. Clear, emphatic, commanding words. Right? That's the original document. And then that was still not enough for them. We got to get more separation. We want to be more clear about this. So then we get that First Amendment, which says in its entirety, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or of the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition their government for a redress of grievances. 6 rights: secular government, religious freedom, speech, press, assembly, petition. All of those rights are meant to bolster our right to think freely, to believe freely. And we, as a movement, have really settled into this thinking that church-state separation, and more importantly, we've settled into talking about church-state separation as though it is this minor part of our Constitution, this minor clause, part of one clause of the First Amendment. It is not. It is our entire Constitution. It is everywhere. And we have got to expand our understanding of where church-state separation comes from, where it resides, where it lives. Because right now at this court, we have essentially been stuck into the tiniest corner and made irrelevant by the free exercise clause. They've put baby in a corner, damn it. It is my contention that religious freedom cannot exist without the separation of church and state. There is no freedom of religion without a government that is free from religion, that a secular government is a prerequisite to true religious freedom. And I've got some very good support from those people that we call the founding fathers and their missives and their musings. If a government can tell you which God to pray to or when, you're not free. If it can recommend that you trouble deaf heaven, or this deaf heaven and not that deaf heaven with your bootless cries, you're not free. I'd be the first to admit that we have never fully realized this ideal, that we haven't built that wall of separation between church and state that Jefferson contemplated in that metaphor, that he contemplated with such reverence in his letter to the Danbury Baptists on New Year's Day in 1802. But we have, and we can build it again on the other side of what all of this is. And it's also true that, originally some of the colonies and states maybe weren't the best at doing that separation, or it wasn't in their state constitutions, but all of them have saw the success of the federal model of disestablishment, and they followed suit, themselves abolishing established churches and beginning to separate church and state up through 1834. And yet I want to leave some time for y'all questions, because I know, even leaving aside everything I've said, that there's like a lot going on, but you probably have other questions you'd like, oh, this is the First Amendment attorney, I would like to ask him about this thing. So I'm just going to say this: despite this, we've never achieved this founding aspiration. And because we've never achieved the separation of church and state, we've also never fully realized religious freedom. And we will not secure true religious liberty until we get that separation. And whatever this is right now, this is not it. But I do still, even though times are dark, I do still have hope that we will get there in the end. And that is why I'm spending all my time thinking about this. And I'm just going to stop talking, because I can feel myself stepping back up onto the soapbox. So time out, Andrew.
You're fine. I could listen to you on your soapbox all day. I put in the chat, only Andrew can make me belly laugh about the rise of fascism. But yeah, everything's well stated, and I appreciate you giving us something to look forward to, because we're in, and we talked earlier, you have children. I now have a grandson. Not that my older children don't matter, but it now every
I'm telling them, they heard it.
I love them very, very much. But the grandson, I don't know, there's something special about watching all those synapses happen in his brain and all the things connecting, and just thinking about what kind of school system do I want this kid to enter into. I mean, here in Arizona, where the district where he lives, they just voted to shut 4 schools next year. And another district, they had over 90 speakers because they're looking at shutting schools. Meanwhile, we're over, I think, what is it, $500 million that these vouchers are taking from us, where the again, here I'm getting on my soapbox, but the teachers, none of them have to have background clearance cards. Make it make sense. The people who are voting against releasing the Epstein files also, are totally cool with private religious schools not having any background checks or fingerprint clearance cards
or any oversight whatsoever.
Yeah, no, not needed. And so there was a question there, and then I got in my soapbox. No, okay. Well, one of the things I wrote down too is they're so much better at manipulating the reality the other side is. And I think about, first Liberty Free, whatever their name is. They represented this woman here in Arizona, Heather Rooks, when she, was adamant about praying at the dais or reading scripture. And now we're looking at Syria, and it was them. And you know what they said? They said, we essentially won. Even though her case was, I don't remember exactly what happened to it, but they said there's no standing. You have no legal standing for this case to go through. That's what the judge, a very conservative judge, said. And they still, their press release said, we pretty much won that one. And she said that she won that on her social media. It's crazy making. So because of everything that's happened in the last week, I want to hear what you have to say about free speech for people who are now being canceled, whether it's their jobs. Currently, we've had quite a few folks get in touch with us about their being targeted for their private social media posts. So what's the outlook on stuff like that? What recourse do those folks have?
Yeah, I mean, this is where the lawyer answer, it depends, it really comes in handy. For each of those, it's going to be a different instance, and it's going to be a different case. I mean, the part of the problem that we face here is there's a deep love of freedom of speech in this country, but also in a way a deep misunderstanding of it. And I think one thing that I think, and before all this happened, I used to talk about this. One way to think about free speech is that it is both a constitutional right and an American value. And as a constitutional right, freedom of speech protects you from government overreach, from government censorship, from the government saying you can't say this, and if you want to say this, you have to get a license, and we're going to deny it, right? Like that protects you from the government. There are instances where it can apply to private actors, but we'll leave those out for now. Protects you from the government, but it's also an American value. It's this thing that we as a country, we as a people, we as a society say, look, we think that this is more valuable than a lot of other things, than people's feelings, if we want to take the other side's sort of formulation of it. Like it is worth having this and lifting it up, even though sometimes, you know, people may feel left out or hurt, etc., whatever it is. So it's not, and we are in a moment where we are seeing very much like both of those things coming through. When the federal government threatens to pull an FCC license, for instance, right? That is the government using its power to throttle, threaten, censor speech. That is a First Amendment problem, right? That could very well be a First Amendment violation. When we have people who are saying things in private places or even publicly on social media, but you know, private venues, and seeing consequences for that, that may be more of the value of American, or of freedom of speech that we value in America, being trampled and suffocated by what looks a lot like a mob in a way. So it depends a lot on individual cases. And I would just say, if you think your freedom of speech was violated, especially by your employer, you need to hook up with a lawyer. Because there's a whole bunch of other things that are going to, it depends on what state you're in, it depends on what kind of contract you have, like what are you at will, like there's a lot of stuff that is going to go into that. So if that is, you got to get hooked up with a lawyer. I would say an employment lawyer more so than even a First Amendment attorney.
And you know, I'm going to this is the former teacher in me speaking, but
Yeah.
I'm going to go ahead and push everybody right now. If you are not a member of your union and you're a classified or certified staff member, it's time to just start paying those dues, to be quite honest. I'm not getting paid by the union. Okay, whatever. Let's see. You know, like talking about the reality thing, and I saw some screenshot of, you know, Roseanne talking about being canceled by the Obamas, right? And it's like that's the nuance in the speech that they use, right? What she did was degrade the Obamas back in 2018, right? When Trump was president, I believe is when it happened, right? She said something really horrible about them. They had nothing to do with ABC deciding to like drop her contract or whatever, but in the collective hive mind of MAGA, all they know is that presidents have been canceling people all the time, because
Yeah,
that's how
well,
it's, yeah.
and there's one other thing I think that's worth noting that you reminded me that I need to say. I think we should never ever rely on or even expect a for-profit company to defend anyone's freedom of speech, either as a legal right or the American value, right? Like for-profit companies exist to make money, and they do all kinds of wonderful marketing to make us feel good and fluffy about the things that they want to sell us, right? But like they exist to make money, right? Like I do not care, and Elon Musk is maybe a more obvious example than some of the other ones. I do not care what any social media platform says. It is not there to give you greater freedom of speech. It is there to make money. And I mean, I think Elon is kind of a perfect example with that, but I would apply that to any of those platforms. Like we should stop expecting them, and we should stop relying on them to be the defenders of free speech. And I mean, I do think this is a moment though where it is time for people to really start speaking up anywhere, everywhere against these, whether you think of them as violations or whether you simply think of them as this goes against my values as an American.
So I want to talk a little bit about, there was an incident, we talked about it before we started the webinar, but in Fountain Hills, you've got a town council where they're you know, just this long memorial service for Charlie Kirk, and there were children present, and they were invited by the town council. Like, I know that that's the difference, right, between, say, a city council meeting, a legislative you know, meeting or whatever, the floor of the state legislature, and school districts, because of the presence of children. Good. I mean, how can this happen at a city council meeting when they've invited the children? It seems
I
like
mean,
there
it
should be.
shouldn't. It absolutely shouldn't. And I think like here, this is another example where we could do a better job on our side of talking about what the problem is, right? Like for years, for decades, like we have been painted as people who are just, you know, these angry people who are annoyed by any mention of religion at all. Um, and that's the narrative that they want to paint whenever we would make an objection to, say, a member of the town council opening the Bible and reading it before or during a meeting, something like that. um and we've done a bad job of humanizing these cases, and what is really going on, and putting that human face on the cost and on the damage that we are seeing as a result of this. What we are talking about in that instance, we are talking about public officials abusing their power to
Mhm.
impose their personal religion on other people's children. And that is something that should piss every American off. I don't care what kind of church or house of worship you go to or not on the weekends. A public official abusing their power to impose their personal religion on other people's kids is wrong. It's not just unconstitutional, it is morally wrong too. And we ought to be talking about and thinking about and arguing, certainly publicly, about those kind of things in that way, not
Mhm.
just in this violates Woolman versus Walter, or Larkin versus Grendel Den, or Torcaso v. Walker. Like we have got to be talking about it in those much stronger terms. I'll pause there.
Mhm.
I have more thoughts.
I couldn't agree with you more. And I don't remember who it was, but there was a member of Congress on some like indivisible call. This was a couple weeks ago,
Mhm.
talking about owning those words like patriot and like,
Yeah.
even things like our sacred duty, to kind of be like, hey, you're not the only people that think about this in a very special way about protecting children or whatever it is. You know what I
I
mean?
mean, that's why the subtitle of my first book, The Founding Myth, is why Christian nationalism is un-American, right? Like it, again, go back to where I was talking about the separation of church and state being woven into the fabric of our Constitution, right? The people who are willing to stand up and defend that separation, those are the true patriots. I mean, it's everywhere in our Constitution. Not the people that are willing to trample it, not the people that are willing to abuse their power to impose their personal religion on other people's kids. Right? The fact
Hmm.
is, America will never be a Christian nation, because the moment it becomes a Christian nation, it will cease to be America.
Hmm. Here, you know what? There's one question here. This one comes from Annika, and she is asking how she mentions a Heritage Foundation report, and now her question is, how are our secular allies preparing to support the trans community against religious extremism that is embedding to the point of naming trans people terrorists and bringing the full weight of the Justice Department against us?
Yeah, I mean, this is something that I think, for instance, our work at Americans United for Separation of Church and State, AU.org, like this is something we think about a lot. And I think there are a lot of other issues that are tied up into the separation of church and state. And in fact, it's one of the reasons that I fight for it every single day, is because it provides the bedrock, the base for so many of the other rights and fights that I care about, whether it is, abortion rights, right? Like for instance, at AU, we took this case in Missouri challenging the abortion ban there as a violation of the separation of church and state, because they wrote into the ban, Almighty God is the author of life. And they quoted extensively from the Bible on the floor debate when they were passing the law. That's abortion. LGBTQ rights, I think there's like some pretty obvious tie-ins. Like a lot of the anti-LGBTQ bills that we are seeing are not just motivated by Christian nationalism, but they're justified by quoting the Bible, by citing scripture. And there's a big case, excuse me, coming up at the Supreme Court. I believe it's set for October 7th, but don't quote me on that. It might be October 9th. Oral argument involving, well, I have 1 minute when I have to go get my kids. There's so much work to be done on this front, and I think a lot of the groups, the national groups, are really trying to do that. And I think the nexus of the LGBTQ plus fight for rights and church-state separation. I think there's massive overlap on this. And this is something I would really encourage everybody, check out the Summit for Religious Freedom, which is in April, thesrf.org. We have tracks that kind of and some amazing talks that go over this, and it is a really, really good question. And I mean, I absolutely think it's kind of crucial to the fight. And the last thing I want to say about that is that the other side is so good about driving wedges into our coalitions. And they have done this from the beginning. Abortion itself was a wedge issue where a group of straight, white, conservative Christian men got together, and to avoid sounding like the racists they were, chose abortion as the wedge issue that could drive into our coalition, and it succeeded beyond their wildest dreams. And they are looking desperately around for the next one now that they have won on that, and they seem to be settling very much on trans folk. And I am, for one, not going to let that happen.
Right on. Well, thank you for that. I think that's a great opportunity for you to take care of all the things that you need to take care of. And again, as always, Andrew Seidel, thank you so much for joining us today. And
it was my pleasure and felt therapeutic in a way. And listen, if anybody has thoughts on that too, and Andrew, you didn't mention this, you didn't think about this, or you got me thinking, like, find me on social media. I'm Andrew L. Seidel everywhere. Send them to me. I very much want to hear them. Again, you know, I'm thinking about this. This is going to be the focus of some writing that I'm doing. So hit me up. Would very much like to hear. Thank you, everyone.
Well, have fun at all 6 of your soccer games, and everybody else stick around because I have some updates. Thanks, Andrew. Take care.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, folks, there is an awful lot going on right now, and I feel compelled I'm almost kind of glad that Andrew is, you know, needing to leave a little bit early because we have a lot going on. So I'm going to be reading from my updates right here. I just can't stress enough how important this moment is in our state and country's history. The assassination of Charlie Kirk has become the rallying cry for white Christian nationalists all throughout the state and the country. Free speech is under attack, and now more than ever, we need to show up for democracy or we will lose it, full stop. In the past week in Arizona, 2 staff members at rural elementary schools in Yavapai County have been targeted and their jobs are in jeopardy simply for expressing their thoughts in their personal, private social media accounts. In one case, the educator posted a direct quote from Charlie Kirk. In school board meetings and city council meetings all over the state, elected officials use their time at the dais in public government, taxpayer-funded buildings, eulogizing a man who advocated for fascist policies in America in 2025. So their board meetings are going to be taking place in the first 2 weeks of October. So if you want to volunteer to email or to speak at these meetings, I am going to drop a link in the chat real quick. So this is our volunteer sign up form. We can get you informed about what is going on. So let's see, let me get to my script again here. Oops, wrong one. I can do this. See, this is why I don't handle the technology. Also, as I mentioned in our conversation with Andrew Seidel in Fountain Hills, a family received an invitation to attend I believe it was the 16th of this month, the town council meeting, because one of their children was receiving an award. During the meeting, this family was shocked at the overt religiosity and divisive nature of the meeting. She took to her TikTok account and it went viral. So give me a second while I share my screen. Let's see here. Okay, let me get back to this. And let's see. So here, and I'm going to go back. Let's see if people can hear this though.
So rest in
Please let
Charlie Kirk was horrific.
I just want to make sure. Could you let me know if you can see the screen? Let's see. Could you just let me know in the chat,
Yeah,
folks? Okay,
we
good,
can
great. Thank
see
you
it,
so much. Okay,
but I don't
so-
think the sound is coming through, Jeannie. Try it again.
Here, let me try it again.
Okay.
Is the sound?
Murdered.
Yeah, turn it up though.
Rest in peace, Charlie Kirk. God be with your wife, children, family, and all who loved you. Would you pray with me? We saw nationwide as well-known leftist activists offered empty words and crocodile tears at the same time as joking about Charlie's death in their private Discord channels. All death can do to a believer is deliver him to Jesus. May we all, when we die, make the demons rejoice.
Romans 10:13 says, "For whoever calls on the name of the Lord will be saved."
Assassination did not happen in some vacuum. It was not some random fluke act. The hatred that birthed it has been stirring since Charlie first started Turning Point, and each of us at the company have looked that hatred in the eye. Do not be afraid to live your life in such a way that hell rejoices at your death. In fact, that should be your life goal for Charlie. And heaven awaits those who are believers.
Charlie Kirk was not murdered for politics. He was murdered for his faith in Jesus Christ.
May we all be so courageous, so bold, so effective, so faithful, so obedient to the Lord, so relentless in the pursuit of his glory that when we die, all of God's enemies cheer. On Wednesday, Charlie Kirk was
Okay, hold on, let me get there. Okay, stop. Wait, make it stop. All right, so let me get back to it. That's just the tip of the iceberg, folks. Because additionally, the invocation ended up being a very long memorial to a guy who mocks the idea of coexistence by creating a sticker with the word coexistence composed of automatic weapons. Let's not forget that part, folks. So during this, an audience member poked and prodded a child with autism who did not stand up during this offensive and ridiculously long speech, trying to compel them to stand up during the speech. So again, let me get back, folks, share my screen once again so you can see this horrific video because it's not great at all. Let's see. All right, here we go again. And thanks to this.
Longer beyond this earth, his words remain a powerful reminder of the principles he dedicated his life to sharing, and his legacy will continue to live on through the countless lives he touched. With that, I'll leave you with just a couple of quotes from Charlie.
So you can't quite see it right there, but there's an older couple, and they're both kind of trying to nudge this kid, who, by the way, has probably been standing for a few minutes anyway, and decided to sit down. Plus, the speaker says at the very beginning, stand if you choose to do so.
Stop having a human connection with someone you disagree with. It becomes a lot easier to want to commit violence against that group. What we as a culture have to get back to. Lord, in all things, we glorify you and you alone. Let your spirit work in us to build bridges where walls have been raised. Unite us in purpose and vision, for we can accomplish so much more together than apart. While many of us may come before you with heavy hearts for the divisions that exist within our nation, we know that you are a God of peace.
So again, people feeling entitled to touch another person's child because they don't like the way they're being parented. I thought parental rights was a thing with this crowd. So again, this council needs to hear from those of us who value the separation of religion and government and who believe our leaders should de-escalate violent rhetoric rather than deepen divisions within their own communities, especially when they know that there will be children at the meeting. Again, strange how the parental rights crowd doesn't seem to give a flying fig about the rights of the parents in that audience. And folks, that's just one meeting. In Peoria, board members fawned over a man whose operatives in Turning Point USA frequent board meetings and call for violence against just about anyone who does not march in lockstep with them. Pretty much anyone who isn't a white cisgender hetero man and their trad wives, I guess. So 2 of the board members in Peoria Unified School District read scripture during their eulogies. And last night in Paradise Valley Unified School District, white Christian nationalist board member Sandra Christensen cited multiple scripture in her eulogy. So hold on once again, let me get to my sharing screen. Here we go. And share. Let's see, 12:59. We'll get through it. All right, here we
I
go.
want to reflect on why I'm here and why I ran for this office. Since 2015, when my son first entered PVUSD, I've been praying for this district. Week after week, year after year, I join with other moms and grandmothers lifting up our schools, our teachers, our administrators, and our children by name. I served as a room mom for several years, supporting classrooms in any way I could. Over time, God placed on my heart a calling to step forward into a greater role of service. I don't believe that I'm sitting on this dais here tonight by accident. I was elected to this board because of faithful prayer, the prayers of churches, family, friends, prayer warriors who ask God to raise up leaders for such a time as this. And I carry that responsibility with deep humility and gratitude. And I believe it's important to say this plainly, despite what some secular voices may argue. Our republic was founded on Judeo-Christian values. Our Constitution and Bill of Rights were written by God-fearing Americans who understood that our freedoms come from God and not government. Our First Amendment secures freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. That distinction matters, especially in times when faith is pushed aside in public square. Charlie Kirk often spoke with clarity about this, that truths of scripture are not meant to stay in church pews, but to shape how we live and lead in every area of life. Romans 12:21 tells us, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. In the face of school.
All right, so she goes on, folks, and I could give her that airtime, but you don't need it. All you need to know is what we just heard from Andrew Seidel, right, is directly opposed to what this woman is saying. And wouldn't it be great if all of us maybe could send the YouTube video of Andrew Seidel marked exactly where he cites the Establishment Clause and the importance of it for all of us. So there's a lot happening right now, secular fam, and we really, really do need all hands on deck. Turning Point USA is claiming right now that they had tens of thousands of requests from young people wanting their clubs on their high school campuses. Everything is connected. You know, they're defunding education. They're opening the floodgates for private vouchers, funding with zero accountability. Get rid of social workers and counselors and make sure the working conditions in our public schools are untenable. Elect and appoint evangelical extremists at every level of government. I mean, the current president just designated Antifa a domestic terrorist group, and that's on purpose. There is no organized group Antifa. Therefore, anybody that this regime deems as such is now an enemy of the state. This is not a drill, folks. No one's going to save us but us. And so I'm going to end with a quote from one of the greatest shows that you shouldn't watch on Disney anymore, apparently, right? And it comes from one of the characters of that show as they sink deeper and deeper into fascism. And she says, I stand this morning with a difficult message. I believe we are in crisis. The distance between what is said and what is known to be true has become an abyss. Of all the things at risk, the loss of an objective reality is perhaps the most dangerous. The death of truth is the ultimate victory of evil. When truth leaves us, when we let it slip away, when it is ripped from our hands, we become vulnerable to the appetite of whatever monster screams the loudest. So there's your hope, I guess, secular fam. It's up to each and every one of us to show up at our local school board meetings, at our local town council meetings, city hall meetings, at our legislative hearings, everywhere. We need to step up. We need to email. We need to call. We need to go to those meetings, and we need to show our support because we can't let those voices drown us out anymore, folks. So with that, yes, it was Mon Mothma from Andor. I got it from our board chair. And next week, by the way, next week, we are going to be speaking with the documentary filmmaker who documents the targeting of a professor at ASU who is targeted by Turning Point USA. I told you last week that we've gotten an email saying, how dare you, and you better pull this, and it's disrespectful. What's disrespectful about it? The truth? It shouldn't be. So please show up. Please support us. We just heard from Andrew Seidel, and we are currently fundraising for our legal department. You heard that our only defense here, God, I feel like I'm in a PBS like fundraiser, Jerry Lewis or something, but seriously, folks, please consider if you haven't become a monthly member of our organization today, because we're going to need all of your help to get through and get past whatever awaits us. So thank you, folks, for coming, and I hope that you all have a wonderful weekend. Take care. Bye, secular fam.